Well, joining me now is former Defence Minister Wayne Mapp. And Wayne, what did you make of the government's announcement today?
It's good evening, Rebecca. Look, I actually reckon it's a pretty good announcement overall. Given our distance from the theatre, it does make sense for us to kind of take a more of a logistics role. And from what I can see, what we'll be doing is consolidating arms shipments into Poland, and then they'll be transferred across the border. Now, obviously, we won't do the transfer into the border, but consolidating into a forward base in Poland is a critical task, and New Zealand will do that well.
So last week, Wayne, we weren't sending so-called lethal aid. This week we are. What do you think has changed?
Well, I think the scale of the atrocities, although I remember last week we did supply the intelligence operators, and they perform an absolutely critical role. One of the key jobs that NATO has been doing collectively is providing battlefield intelligence and strategic intelligence to Ukraine. They would not be doing as well as they are without that up-to-date intelligence, and I know from direct experience how good our intelligence operators are.
Yes, and so those eight intelligence operators may actually be our greatest contribution to what's happening on the battlefields in Ukraine.
Well, they say war is logistics is what the professionals talk about, and the armchair generals always talk about tactics and fighting. So the logistics role is absolutely central, especially getting all the equipment sorted and consolidated on the border of Ukraine and Poland, so then the Ukrainians can use it effectively. So that's a good job, and I have to say the Prime Minister and the Minister of Defence have done a pretty good job in sorting this all out and making sure that New Zealand is playing an effective part.
And so it's sometimes easy to think from where we are that actually Ukrainians are out there fighting this war on their own. But what you're saying is actually the international community is supporting them with intelligence from around the region, watching what Russia is doing and letting them know.
Well, almost certainly the Ukrainians actually have way better intelligence of what's happening on the ground and in the areas occupied by Russia than the Russians themselves will. And the Western intelligence system, particularly around satellites, signals interception and all of that, is really world class. And NATO has got far, far more capability around this area than Russia has. Remember, NATO actually covers 1 billion people. Russia's 140 million. I mean, there's a huge disparity, really. And so I think the Ukrainians, who after all actually have to carry the fight, that they wouldn't have been as effective but for the fact of the NATO assistance and of course, New Zealand's assistance.
In terms of our assistance that we are sending over there, is that also, Wayne, sending a message? Like, I do imagine that Europe has plenty of aircraft, but we're essentially saying we are with the West here, aren't we?
We're more than just with the West. We are effectively a Western nation. We're part of the broader Western alliance. It's noteworthy, isn't it, that the people who are providing direct assistance, as opposed to votes in the UN, are fundamentally the Western alliance nations. Now, I suppose if you're in South America or Africa or Asia, you might see this as a war that concerns essentially Europe and therefore NATO. So maybe you can understand why they're not forward-leaning. But New Zealand and Australia, and these days to some extent as well, Japan and Singapore, have always been involved in this. And the reason why, of course, is because we are actually part of the Western grouping of nations. And the United Nations recognises that. We're always put in that group.
Wayne, I have an impossible question for you to finish with, but how does this war end? Where does it go next? I know it's a tough question, but you're a former Minister of Defence. What do you think?
I've come to the view that Ukraine will actually win this war. At least they'll fight the Russians to a standstill. Look, the Russians might be able to hold on to Donbass, and they'll certainly hold on to Crimea. Whether they can hold on to the area of land that links the two around Mariupol, will certainly be trying damn hard to do that. But I think that's as much as Russia will be able to do, and even that will be tough. So that when peace negotiations ultimately happen, and they will, then Ukraine is able to speak from a position of strength.
Well, Wayne Mapp, thanks so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.